Thanks for tuning into the afternoon shift on WBEZ and WBEZ.org. I'm Nyla Boodoo. Who should represent Illinois' 10th district in the U.S. House of Representatives? It's a race that's drawn national interest and money from all across the country. As we've said before, that's because the North Shore District is looked at as a place for the GOP to reinforce its power in the House of Representatives. It's a rematch from 2012 when Democrat Brad Schneider narrowly defeated Republican Bob Dold. Now Dold is trying to reclaim his seat. Incumbent Democrat Representative Brad Schneider joined us last week. You can find that conversation online. We'll tweet out a link if you follow WBEZ Afternoon. Right now, I'd like to welcome his Republican opponent, Representative Bob Dold. Welcome to the Afternoon Shift.
Now, it's great to be with you.
Now, you served as the 10th District Representative 2 years ago before you lost re-election, as I mentioned. What lessons did you learn in your first term?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, as a small business owner, someone that meets a budget and a payroll, from my perspective, I don't think government was working. It's not working now, clearly, as I'm hearing from people all across the district. And they're losing faith that Washington is there to help them, Springfield as well. And so I think the lessons are that we need people that are willing to work together, to work across party lines to actually solve problems. And that's something that I have a record of doing. And I was ranked the most independent bipartisan member of the Congress in my time there. I think that's exactly what people are looking for. And by comparison, my opponent's been ranked one of the least effective.
Let's talk about that partisan gridlock for a minute. You mentioned your opponent. Obviously, this is something that you've criticized him for. When you were in Congress, how did you work with members on the other side of the aisle to get something done? Can you give me a specific example?
Sure. Everything I did was with bipartisan support. So it's not just specific examples, it's everything. Because understanding that in order to create a win-win situation to actually move legislation forward, and I was one of just a couple of people that actually was able as a freshman to pass bills through the House of Representatives. A couple of those were talking about increased sanctions on Iran. Others were no pensions for felons. But there was a number of things that we worked on. And one of the things that I'm certainly proud of is the fact that for the first time in a generation, Nyla, there was a bipartisan budget that came to the floor of the House of Representatives based upon the President's Deficit Reduction Commission. Simpson-Bowles, 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats co-sponsored this budget to really talk about how do we move things forward to actually break through the gridlock and solve a problem.
Well,
I was one of them.
Right. And as you know, fast forward now 3 years, and I think, frankly, what the House is known for is gridlock. And when you talk about the budget, I don't think anyone sees bipartisan in there at all. So how would you try to break up that gridlock?
Well, I think it's leadership. You've got to make sure that you're stepping forward. You're the one that's reaching across the aisle. You're the one, or in this instance, I have demonstrated that record and built relationships with those on the other side of the aisle with someone that they can work with, that they can trust, that we actually can work together to solve problems, because that's what people do every day around the 10th district, around our country. People are sitting around kitchen tables today worried that they're falling behind, and they realize that compromise, for them is something that they have to do if they want to move things forward. Same thing has to happen in Washington, D.C.
Since you've represented the 10th district, it's been redrawn. I wonder what's unique to you about that district and what you see as the top voter priorities.
Well, it was redrawn as the entire country was redrawn. And when people talk about partisanship and gridlock, one of the reasons I point to as to why things are so polarized today is because of redistricting. Republicans want to create a lock Republican district. The Democrats want to create a lock Democrat district. And ultimately what we have is we've got very few districts that are going to be swing districts. And out of the 435 races for the United States Congress this year, only about 35 will be competitive. And I think that's wrong. So what ends up happening right now is the legislatures are choosing their voters. The voters aren't choosing their legislators. And that, I think, is wrong and is part of the problem of what we have today.
When you talk about the priorities for the district, what, if you were elected, what would be your main priorities?
As I'm listening to people, there's no question. It's about jobs in the economy is still the number one issue that's impacting people. We all know people that have been out of work, and some for a long period of time. There are pockets of unemployment. If you go up to North Chicago, Waukegan, out in the Round Lake area, where there's a significant unemployment population, far greater than not only the national average, but the average in Illinois. And we need to bring good, high-paying jobs to the area. We have all the assets here to be leading the country, and yet we're not. A great place to raise a family, excellent educational institutions, transportation and infrastructure that should rival and certainly is a huge competitive advantage for us over Wisconsin, Indiana, and our neighbors. We've got, a great culture in the city of Chicago. We've got great natural resources. The jewel of our ecosystem is right outside these windows here in the Great Lakes. The one key ingredient that we're missing is a business-friendly environment. And I do believe that has to turn around in order for us to attract more businesses here so that we can have good, high-paying jobs.
Representative Dold, let me go back to the jobs, because one of the things I asked your opponent when he was here is when you think about the North Shore, certainly there are also a lot of young people on the North Shore who are back living with their parents because they can't find jobs. What ideas do you have specifically to help young people with employment, with recent college graduates?
I think that's a fantastic question. I've laid out a Main Street jobs vision because jobs are really created by small business. 2/3 of all net new jobs are created by small business. I want to make sure that they have access to resources to be able to invest and grow their business. And if you look at that, the fastest growing segment of small businesses are women-owned businesses. So we've got to invest in our infrastructure. We've got to deal with making sure that they can go to their local community bank and get that loan in order to invest and grow their business. We have to make sure that education, and more specifically STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, so that we're preparing students to take jobs in the 21st century, especially as you look at the 10th District. It's the third largest manufacturing district in the country. And as I listen and talk to manufacturers on a daily basis, they say, I've got jobs available today. I can't find people qualified to take those jobs. So STEM education is certainly one of them. And then we've got to fix our tax code. Both the Republicans and Democrats agree that we have to have a tax code that works for everybody, not just the well-connected. So these are just some of the things that need to happen if we want to talk about turning it around. And what's interesting is my opponent came out and I'm sure talked about being pro-small business, yet he voted against small business 70% of the time. Says he's for manufacturing, but votes against manufacturing 65% of the time.
Let's talk about what you would do versus what your opponent has done. And when you mention STEM education, as you said, as you know, when you speak with manufacturers, they say that they can't find the right workers for the jobs that they have.
Sure.
And then you sort of match that up with college graduates who are graduating in those fields and then cannot find the right work. So how do we fix that?
Well, I think one of the things certainly that I've done is I've created an educational advisory board, and it's been active for a long time. But the head of my educational advisory board is a gentleman by the name of Laz Lopez, who was the principal of Wheeling High School. He's been promoted to be one of the superintendents. And what his vision was is he said, you know what, we're going to make Wheeling High School, which is 38% English language learners, 42% free and subsidized lunch, not the school you would think of as saying we're going to make this a STEM school. And not just for the top 15%, but for everybody, so that every senior that graduates has the opportunity to get a certificate in tool and die casting, architectural design, pre-nursing care, CAD design, graphic design, so that they can get a job going out into the workforce now, or if they want to, take that skill and go on to college or get a better degree. So those are the types of things. And one of the other things that we did with Wheeling High School is that we brought Intel, HP, Autodesk into there, married them up with manufacturers to create a high-performance computing challenge so that not only were they hooked up with manufacturers in the community, they also had access to high-performance computing technology, something that they weren't able to have before.
I'm speaking with Republican Representative Bob Dold, who is running for office in the 11th District to represent the U.S. House of Representatives. It's a seat he used to hold and is now trying to get back. And you mentioned tax code. And one of the big things, obviously, one of the big issues that we've seen, is you mentioned big companies. One can't help but think of Walgreen Company and AbbVie and companies who have tried to relocate overseas in order to. And I think one part of that conversation is about our tax code and how this exposes the need for it to be fixed. What would you do to help that?
Listen, I think the tax code is, as you pick up, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and they talk about inversions. 3 of the 4 companies that were talked about most are 10th District companies. And as I look at the 10th District, there's no question that we want to create a tax code that, again, works for everyone, right? Not just the well-connected. And we want to make sure that we are attracting additional businesses, because we want businesses from all over the world to come here to the United States, and more specifically to the 10th District. And if you look at it, if you just take a ride down 294, Abbott, AbbVie, Baxter, Takeda, Astellas, Dow, Kraft, Walgreens, Allstate. I mean, we have a tremendous amount of those resources that are here, so it's a great synergy, and that top-quality talent should be attracting more businesses here. We just don't have a tax code that's business-friendly. We need to make sure that we have a tax code, lower the corporate tax rate, but eliminate the lobbyist loopholes out there that favor one specific company over another to really start attracting more businesses from around the globe to come right here to Illinois.
Representative Dold, I should have corrected myself. I said 11th. I meant to say 10th district. Obviously, we don't want to get anyone confused. You did, but I want to make sure everyone else does. Israel, I wanted to move off of domestic topics for a minute, just because there's been such a conversation during this race, both you and your opponent, Israel and Palestine. And I wondered if you could sort of explain what distinguishes your position on this issue and what new ideas you have to help alleviate the situation in the Middle East in regards to Israel and Palestine.
Well, it's an enormous question as we look at just leadership, I think. And I think the world, if you take a step back, the world's asking a very important question, and that's where is America? And we see that in the absence of leadership, someone will rush to fill that void. And as we look over at China, and they're expanding no-fly zone, North Korea firing missiles at South Korean military exercises. Obviously, you have what's going on in the Ukraine and Crimea, the genocide in Syria, the rise of ISIS in Iraq and Syria, then what's happening in Israel with Hamas in Gaza, and then you've got Libya. And in all those things, have we taken our eye off the ball of the greatest threat I believe we have to our national security, and that's a nuclear-armed Iran. And from my perspective, that's something that's critical not only for our allies, but for us here. Iran, if you listen, have said time and again that they want to wipe Israel off the face of the map, drive them into the sea, that they are the little Satan, which naturally begs the question, Nyla, who's the big Satan? And I would argue that it is the United States of America. As we look more specifically at what's happening in Israel, I have been a huge proponent to make sure that the world knows that the United States will stand shoulder to shoulder with our one true ally in the Middle East, and that's the state of Israel. There can be no daylight. And as we look at what's going on right now, there are many that are talking about a new story in the Atlantic that they believe that they're in crisis right now, that there is some daylight in between the administration and Israel.
Do you believe that?
Well, I certainly, if you look at what's going on when the administration says that we want to approve military-to-military munitions at a time of conflict, when Israel and Hamas are at war, yeah, I think that's a problem. And certainly that's what the 10th District has had, really a vocal, outspoken advocate to speak out on the floor. When Secretary Kerry comes out and talks about Israel being a potential apartheid state, the 10th District member of Congress said, that's right, nothing, right? And I would have been the one speaking out on the floor. I would have said that that's unacceptable. That's unacceptable for the United States, for our lead diplomat, who is supposed to be able to take our values to the world, to be making those types of statements about our one true ally, the one that is absolutely one of our best advocates, the one that is, it's not just military to military type stuff. It's about a culture. It's about making sure they're sharing technology. Those types of things are very important. So I look at this thing, my opponent, he's has said time and again that he supports J Street. That's not been my take. I would not be a J Street supporter. Far more in the mold of AIPAC and trying to make sure that we are standing up against the delegitimization efforts that are happening around the globe today against the state of Israel.
Representative Dold, here in Illinois, I think we often hear from many Republicans, they call themselves moderate. Would you consider yourself also a moderate?
Well, you don't have to take my word for it. The answer is yes. You can take the Chicago Tribune, the Daily Herald, the Chicago Jewish Star.
How about how you describe yourself?
Fiscal conservative, social moderate, without question. And the thing is that you can just take a look at my record, and I would go to GovTrack, which is a third-party organization that tracks every member of Congress. So it's GovTrack, GovTrack.us. Search for Bob Dold. And what you're going to find is they scored on an ideological score axis and a leadership axis. We're right in the middle, very high in the leadership score.
Do you think, does that make it difficult to appeal to the Republican base?
No, listen, I mean, they know exactly where I am on this thing. And again, as a small business owner, I think what's important is to be a leader in the 10th District. I want to represent everyone, not just one political party. As has been noted, that's my opponent has put together a partisan record.
We just have about a minute left, but I know this race has been so incredibly close as it was 2 years ago. What do you think is going to make the difference on Election Day?
I think what's going to make the difference is that we have one term versus one term. And as you look at this, if you look at GovTracks, again, high in the leadership score, right in the middle. When we looked for Brad Schneider out there, we couldn't find him on the plot graph. And we said, what are we doing wrong? GovTracks got back to us as of September 23rd and said, you're not doing anything wrong. He hasn't done enough to warrant a dot on the plot graph. That's unacceptable for a 10th District member of Congress not to have done enough. He says one thing and does another. He says he's against the Koch brothers and fossil fuels, yet he's invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in those organizations to line his pockets. He says he's for small business, but votes against small business. For manufacturing, but votes against manufacturing. He says he's going to be bipartisan, but has delivered nothing but a partisan record.
So
you can't say one thing and do another.
So for you, what do you want voters to know about you as opposed to what you're saying about your opponent?
I want voters to know that my record as a thoughtful, independent leader that is willing to work across party lines, rank the most independent bipartisan member of my time in Congress, is exactly the type of leadership that I'll provide again. We need people to break the gridlock, and that's exactly the type of leadership that I've demonstrated. And I'm asking not only for their help, I'm asking for their support on November 4th.
Representative Bob Dold is running for election in Illinois' 10th District to represent you all in the U.S. House of Representatives. Representative Dold, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.